She hadn't eaten in 2 days when her knuckles finally met the wood of that door. Not a timid knock, not a polite tap, but the desperate hollow pounding of a woman who had already lost everything and was down to her last act of courage. Her legs were shaking. Her pride was already dead in the dust behind her. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel and follow Martha's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The dress had been brown once. A warm, decent brown that Martha Gaines had been proud of when she'd stitched it herself 3 winters ago in a kitchen that smelled like her mother's bread. Now it was the color of dried mud and road dust, darker under the arms, fraying at both cuffs where she'd worn them against wagon wheels and fence posts, and the rough edges of a life that kept refusing to be kind to her. She stood at the base of the mountain trail and looked up. The cabin sat maybe a quarter-mile ahead, tucked against the hillside, like it had grown there, like the pines had simply agreed to make room for it. There was smoke coming from the chimney. Thin, steady smoke. Someone was home. Martha's feet didn't move. She'd been walking since before sunup. The soles of her boots, the left one held together now with a strip of leather she'd cut from her satchel. Strap had long since stopped protecting her from the rocks. Every step for the last 2 hours had been a negotiation between her body and her stubborn refusal to lie down in a ditch and give up. She wasn't going to give up, but she also wasn't moving, because she knew what was going to happen when she knocked on that door. She'd knocked on enough doors in the past 4 days to know exactly what came next. The eyes moving over her, the dress, the satchel, the size of her, the aloneness of her. The quick calculation behind polite faces, or not so polite faces. The excuses. The slow closing of the door. No room. No work. No charity for strangers. In Dalton Creek, the innkeeper's wife had looked her up and down and said, "We don't take in women traveling alone." As if Martha's solitude were itself a kind of crime. In Redfield, a farmer's wife had told her they didn't have enough to feed their own family, which might have been true, except that Martha had seen the 3 fat hens in the yard and the smoke coming from a good-sized cook fire around back, and in Harlow's crossing the town, where she'd spent her last coins on a single biscuit and a cup of weak coffee. A man on the porch of the general store had looked at her and said without any shame at all, "Ain't no place for a woman your size to be wandering around looking for handouts." He'd said it loud enough for the 2 men sitting beside him to hear. They'd laughed. Martha had walked out of Harlow's crossing with her back straight and her jaw set, and she had not let herself cry until she was a full mile down the road where there was no one to see her. That had been yesterday. She looked up at the smoke from the chimney again. The thing about asking for help she'd learned was that it wasn't one single hard moment. It was 100 small ones. It was making your feet move when they didn't want to. It was raising your hand to knock when every part of you was bracing for rejection. It was keeping your voice steady when you explained yourself to someone who was already deciding your answer before you'd finished your sentence. And then it was picking yourself back up and doing it again at the next door. Martha picked up her satchel. It was lighter than it had been when she'd left Claremont, because she'd sold most of what was in it piece by piece over the past 2 weeks, and she started walking up the trail. She counted her steps. She did that sometimes when things got hard. It kept her mind from going to the places it wanted to go. It kept her from thinking about the letter in her coat pocket, the one from her brother saying he was sorry, but his wife's family didn't have the room, and maybe Martha ought to write to their cousin in Denver, except that Martha had already written to the cousin in Denver and received no reply. 62 steps. 63. 64. The trail curved around a stand of pines, and then the cabin was right there, close enough to see the detail of it. The solid front door, the wood stacked neatly along the near wall, a horse tied to the post at the far corner, a big roan that turned its head and watched her with dark liquid eyes. She stopped about 20 feet from the door. There was a barn. She'd seen it coming around the curve, a solid structure bigger than she'd expected, set back and to the left. The door was closed. From inside, she could hear the low sound of cattle shifting. A barn was something. A barn was a roof and 4 walls and protection from the wind that had been cutting through her coat for the last 3 nights. She'd slept in a barn before 2 nights ago, actually, when she'd crept into an unlocked one after dark and burrowed into the hay and lain there listening to her own heartbeat, and thinking about how her life had gotten so far from everything she'd imagined for it. That barn's owner had found her in the morning. He hadn't yelled. He'd just stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and looked at her until she got up and gathered her things and left. She hadn't asked. She should have asked, maybe. Maybe if she'd knocked on the door the night before and explained herself, he'd have said yes. Maybe. Or maybe he'd have closed the door in her face, and she'd have had to sleep under the stars, which she'd also done one night when the sky had been clear enough that it wasn't completely miserable. Martha straightened her shoulders. She walked to the front door. She knocked 3 times. Solid, deliberate knocks. Not desperate. She was not going to sound desperate. She waited. For a long moment, nothing. Then the sound of boots on floorboards, slow and unhurried. Martha gripped the strap of her satchel with both hands and made herself breathe. The door opened. The man who filled the doorway was taller than she'd expected. Or maybe it was just that she was so tired that everything looked slightly larger than it was. He was broad through the shoulders, lean in the way that men got who worked outdoors from sunup to sundown, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, like it had been a while since his last barber, and a jaw that was more shadow than skin at this point in the afternoon. He wore a brown vest over a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and his hands, she noticed, were the hands of a man who used them rough and capable, holding the edge of the door like he was deciding something. His eyes were dark, not unfriendly, but reading her. She was used to being read. She made herself hold still and let him do it. "Sir," she said, and she was proud of how level her voice came out. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Martha Gaines. I've been traveling from Claremont and I'm—" She paused because the word was difficult. "I'm in some need of shelter. I don't have money to offer you, but I work hard. I can cook, I can clean, I can do whatever needs doing around a property. I'm not asking for charity." She stopped. "I'm asking for a chance to earn a night's shelter." I didn't say anything right away. His eyes moved over her face, and she didn't look away because she'd learned that looking away made people more suspicious, not less. "Claremont," he said finally. His voice was low, not unkind. "That's a good 3 days' walk from here." "4," Martha said. "For me." Something shifted in his expression, just slightly. "When did you last eat?" The question surprised her. Most people didn't ask that. Most people went straight to the logistics: who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing out here alone? And then worked their way toward the refusal. This man had skipped straight to the part that mattered. "Yesterday morning," she said. "I had some dried corn I'd been carrying." He nodded once, slowly, like he was settling something in his own mind. "There's a barn," she said, because she didn't want to presume. "If you'd be willing to let me sleep there for one night, I'll be gone before dawn. I won't leave a trace that I was here. And if there's any work I can do before I go—" "You don't have to sleep in the barn," he said. She stopped. He stepped back from the door. Not all the way. He left himself in the frame, like he understood that a strange woman wasn't going to walk straight into a stranger's house without some kind of bridge between invitation and trust. But he'd moved. He'd made room. "I've got a spare room," he said. "It's nothing fancy, but it's got a door that locks from the inside and a bed that's better than hay." He paused. "And I was about to make supper." Martha stood in the doorway of the cabin and looked at him and tried to find the catch. There was always a catch. There was always a condition she hadn't heard yet, a thing he wanted in return that she wasn't going to want to give a reason. The kindness was going to turn into something complicated. He seemed to understand what she was looking for. He didn't look insulted by it. "I'm Caleb Ward," he said. "I've run this property for 11 years. My nearest neighbor is 6 miles south. I'm not telling you that to make you nervous," he added. "I'm telling you so. You understand that I don't have much cause to be anything other than what I appear to be. There's nobody out here to perform for." She almost laughed at that. She didn't, but it surprised her, the urge to laugh. She hadn't felt that in a while. "I'm not?" she started, and then stopped, because she wasn't sure how to finish the sentence without sounding like she was accusing him of something. "I've been turned away from a lot of doors," she said instead. "I'm just being careful." "That's smart," he said, without any condescension in it. Just a plain statement of fact. Being careful is smart. He reached into his vest pocket and held something out toward her. It was a key. Plain iron, the kind that fit a simple interior lock. He held it in his palm, not pushing it toward her, not pressing it into her hand. Just offering it level and steady, and waiting. "That's the key to the spare room," he said. "It locks from the inside, unlocks from the outside with the same key, but only one key exists, and it's the one in my hand right now." He paused. "If you take it, I can't get in. You'd have to unlock the door yourself to come out in the morning." He met her eyes. "I want you to understand that before you decide anything." Martha looked at the key. She looked at him. She thought about 4 days of walking. She thought about the man in front of the general store in Harlow's Crossing and his loud, easy laughter. She thought about sleeping in hay and waking up to someone standing over her with their arms crossed. She thought about the letter in her coat pocket that had no answer to offer and no comfort left to give. She reached out and took the key. Her hand was steadier than she'd expected. She'd half thought it might shake. It didn't. Caleb Ward stepped back and made room in the doorway, and Martha Gaines, who had been walking for 4 days, and sleeping in barns and eating dried corn, and holding herself together with nothing but stubbornness, and the refusal to lie down in a ditch, walked into the cabin. It was warm. The fire in the hearth had been burning for a while, and the warmth had soaked into the walls and the floorboards and the air itself. And it hit her all at once. Real warmth. Not just the absence of wind. And for one terrible second, she thought she was going to cry right there in the doorway, like an absolute fool. She didn't. She breathed through her nose and she kept walking, and she looked around the room like a person taking stock of a situation, rather than a person on the edge of collapse. The cabin was clean. That surprised her a little. She'd expected a bachelor's disorder, things left where they'd fallen, dishes not quite dealt with. But the place was ordered in a way that spoke less of fastidiousness, and more of a man who simply knew where things belonged and put them there. A wooden table with 2 chairs. A cook stove with a pot already starting to heat. A shelf with a few books and a tin lantern. A coat rack by the door with a second coat and a hat. "Spare rooms through there," Caleb said, nodding toward a door at the back of the main room. "Take a few minutes if you need them. There's a wash basin inside. Supper'll be ready in about 40 minutes. He didn't look at her like he was waiting for gratitude. He didn't look at her like this was a transaction. He just said it like it was information she needed, and then turned back to the cook stove and picked up a wooden spoon. Martha walked to the door of the spare room. She opened it. Inside, a narrow bed with a clean quilt folded at the foot, a small table, a wash basin with a pitcher of water, a window with the last of the afternoon light coming through it. A simple room. Not fancy like he'd said, but solid. Safe feeling in a way she hadn't felt in 4 days. She set her satchel down on the floor by the bed. She sat on the edge of the mattress just for a moment, because her legs had been carrying her for so long, and they needed to know they could stop. The key was still in her hand. She looked at it. Then she got up and walked to the door and turned the lock. The sound it made, that small, solid click of a bolt sliding home, was the loudest, quietest thing she'd heard in longer than she could remember. She stood there with her hand on the key, and she breathed. Outside, she could hear the faint sounds of Caleb Ward moving around the main room. The scrape of a pan. The low creak of a floorboard. Ordinary sounds. Decent sounds. Martha set the key on the small table where she could see it. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin. She washed her face and her hands and the back of her neck, and the water went gray with road dust almost immediately, and she looked at her own face in the small mirror above the basin, and she barely recognized it, thinner than it had been, sharper at the angles, with a look in her eyes that she'd been carrying for so long she'd stopped noticing it. A look that said, "Brace yourself. Always brace yourself." She dried her hands on the small cloth beside the basin. She sat back down on the edge of the bed. 40 minutes until supper. That was what he'd said. She should probably offer to help. That would be the right thing, to go out there and offer to do something useful. Earn her place at the table, even for this one night. She was good in a kitchen. She could at least set the table or stir whatever was in that pot. She stood up. She looked at the locked door. She looked at the key on the table. She picked it up, unlocked the door, and walked back into the main room. Caleb didn't turn around when she came in. He was at the cook stove adjusting the heat under the pot, and he gave no indication that her return was either expected or surprising, like she was simply there, and that was fine. "Is there something I can do?" she asked. "You don't have to," he said. "I know I don't have to," she said. "I'm offering." He glanced at her, then a quick assessing look, and something in his expression settled. "Bread's in the tin on the shelf," he said, "if you want to slice it. There's a knife in the block by the window." Martha found the bread and the knife, and she sliced the bread, and she set it on the table, and she found plates without being asked, because she knew how to find things in a kitchen, and she set 2 places at the table, and the whole time neither of them said much of anything, and somehow that was all right. The silence between them was not the silence of strangers who have nothing to say to each other. It was something else. Martha couldn't quite name it yet. When the food was ready, a simple stew, beans and salt pork and something green she thought might be dried herbs. Caleb set the pot on the table and sat down across from her and looked at the places she'd set and didn't comment on them. "Go ahead," he said. She ate slowly because she knew better than to eat fast after days of very little. But it took everything she had to eat slowly. The stew was hot and savory and real, and each spoonful was so much better than dried corn and weak coffee that she had to keep her face carefully neutral to keep from making some embarrassing sound of relief. Caleb ate without ceremony. He didn't watch her eat. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't perform the role of gracious host in any way that made her feel like a guest being assessed. He just ate his supper across the table from her like this was an ordinary evening, and she was an ordinary thing in it. Halfway through the meal, she realized her shoulders had come down from around her ears. She hadn't noticed they were up there. They'd been up there so long it had started to feel like the natural position for them. "You said you left Claremont," he said after a while. "Yes." "That where you're from originally?" "No," she said. "I grew up farther east. I came to Claremont 3 years ago. I had work there." She paused. "The work ended." He nodded. He didn't push. "Where are you heading?" he asked. "Denver," she said. It wasn't exactly true. Her cousin in Denver hadn't replied to her letter, and she had no guarantee of welcome there, but it was the direction she'd been pointed, and it was as honest an answer as she had. "I have family there, maybe." "Maybe," he repeated, not with skepticism. More like he understood what maybe meant, the particular weight of it. "I'll be out of your way in the morning," she said. "I meant what I said about working, if there's anything that needs doing before I go." "The morning's a ways off," he said simply. "No need to negotiate it tonight." She looked at him. He was looking at his stew, calm as still water. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. She hadn't meant to ask it quite so directly, but there it was out on the table between them, along with the bread and the salt pork. He looked up. He didn't seem surprised by the question. "Because you knocked," he said. She waited for the rest of it. There wasn't any. "That's all," she said. "That's all," he said. "You knocked and you asked, and that seemed like reason enough." Martha looked at him across the table and thought about all the doors that had not opened when she'd knocked. All the slow final sounds of bolts sliding home on the wrong side. All the reasons people had found to look at her and find her wanting. "Most people don't see it that way," she said. Caleb Ward looked at her steadily. "Most people," he said, "are wrong about a lot of things." The fire in the hearth popped and settled. Outside, the wind had come up, moving through the pines with a sound like water, and the last light was fading from the window over the table. Martha Gaines picked up her spoon. She finished her supper. And for the first time in 4 days, she did not have to brace herself against anything at all. She slept. That was the thing that struck her first. When she opened her eyes the next morning, she had actually slept. Not the half-conscious drifting she'd been doing for 4 nights, one ear, always listening for sounds that didn't belong. Body coiled, then ready to move. Real sleep. The kind that took you under completely and held you there and gave you back to the world slowly in pieces, like it wasn't quite ready to let you go. The quilt was pulled up around her shoulders. She didn't remember doing that. She lay still for a moment, listening. Outside, the window birds. The low rhythmic sound of someone splitting wood, steady, unhurried the crack of the axe clean and even. She counted the strokes without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. The same way she'd counted her steps on the trail yesterday. She sat up and looked at the room around her and let herself remember where she was. The key was on the table where she'd left it. The satchel was on the floor. The water in the basin had gone cold overnight. Morning light was coming through the window, stronger than she'd expected. She'd slept longer than she'd intended, much longer, and something about that made her chest tighten. She didn't sleep long. She didn't allow herself to sleep long. Sleeping long was a luxury that belonged to people whose situations were stable, and her situation was not stable. Her situation was a spare room in a stranger's cabin on a mountain. She didn't know the name of, and she'd told him she'd be gone before dawn. And here the sun was already well up, and she was still in his bed. She got up fast, splashed cold water on her face, smoothed her dress as best she could. It needed washing, everything needed washing, but that was a problem for another time. She braided her hair with quick, practiced hands and pinned it up and picked up the key from the table. She unlocked the door. Caleb Ward was not inside the cabin. The cook stove was cold, but there was a pot sitting on it with a cloth draped over the top, and on the table there was a tin cup and a small plate covered with another cloth. And when she lifted that cloth, she found 2 biscuits and a small jar of preserves, and felt something move in her chest that she didn't have a name for immediately. He'd made her breakfast before going outside. He'd left it covered so it wouldn't get cold too fast. He'd done it without waking her. She stood at the table for a moment with the cloth in her hand and the biscuits in front of her, and she just breathed. Then she poured water from the pot on the stove, still faintly warm, into the tin cup, and she sat down, and she ate both biscuits and all the preserves, which were blackberry, and better than anything she'd had in longer than she could remember. And she told herself very firmly that she was not going to make any kind of emotional event out of a man leaving breakfast on a table. She rinsed her cup in the basin. She folded the cloths. She looked around the cabin to make sure she hadn't left anything out of place. Then she picked up her satchel, and she went outside to find him and tell him she was leaving. I was around the back of the cabin, exactly where the sound of the axe had been coming from, and he looked up when she came around the corner, but he didn't stop what he was doing. Just set the next log on the block and split it in one clean stroke and set the halves aside before straightening up and looking at her properly. "You're up," he said. "I'm sorry," she said. "I meant to be gone before dawn. I told you that, and I didn't say it was a problem," he said. "Still," she said, "I don't want to, Martha." He said her name, simply, not cutting her off, just placing it in front of her like a hand held up. "The biscuits are eaten, I hope." She stopped. "Yes," she said. "Thank you. They were, thank you." He nodded. He picked up the axe again, then didn't swing it. Instead, he looked at her, not the men usually looked at her, assessing or dismissing, but directly, straightforwardly, the way you looked at something you were genuinely trying to see. "You said you know how to cook," he said. "I do," she said carefully. "I've got enough salt pork to last a man living alone another 3 weeks, he said. But I haven't had a decent bread since my neighbor Mrs. Hadley passed in February. I can't bake worth a damn. Never could." He set the axe head down in the dirt, handle up, and leaned on it slightly. "I've got fence posts that need setting on the east side of the property. That's a 2-man job. I've been doing 1 man for a month and not doing well." He met her eyes. "I'm not offering you charity. I'm telling you there's work here that needs doing, and you said you could work." Martha looked at him. "How long?" she said. "Long as the work takes," he said, "which I reckon is about a week, maybe 10 days. She should say no. She knew she should say no. She should pick up her satchel and thank him for the biscuits and the blackberry preserves and the warm room with the key that locked from the inside, and she should get back on the trail toward Denver and whatever maybe waited for her there. "A fair wage," she said. He named a figure. It was fair. More than fair, actually, for what he was describing. It was the kind of wage you paid someone you respected, not the kind you paid someone you were doing a favor. "All right," she said. He nodded once, like a man sealing an agreement, and went back to his wood. Martha went back inside and set her satchel down again and stood in the middle of the cabin and thought 1 week. 10 days at most. Then Denver. She found the flour and the lard and the salt, and she made bread. The rhythm of the morning settled around her like something familiar. The measuring and mixing, the steady heat of the cook stove, the smell of bread starting to rise. She'd cooked in her mother's kitchen for years before Claremont, and in Claremont, she'd cooked for the Hargrove household for nearly 2 years before the Hargroves had lost the house to back taxes, and Martha had lost her position along with it, and found herself with 2 weeks' notice and a recommendation letter that wasn't worth much in a town that was watching its fortunes decline. She didn't think about Claremont if she could help it. But the kitchen work was good. Kitchen work was the kind that asked for your hands and your attention, and didn't leave a lot of room for the other things. Caleb came in around midday and stopped in the doorway, and the look on his face when he registered what she'd done with his kitchen. The bread cooling on the board, the beans slow cooking on the back of the stove. The floor swept was something she would remember for longer than she expected to. I didn't make a production of it. He washed his hands at the basin and sat down and ate what she put in front of him and said, after his first bite of bread, "God, that's good," with a conviction that sounded less like a compliment and more like a man confronting evidence he hadn't expected. "It's just bread," she said. "It's the best bread I've had in 4 months," he said, and tore off another piece. They ate in the same not-quite silence as the night before. It wasn't uncomfortable. Martha had eaten a lot of meals in the last 3 years in various kinds of silence, the kind in the Hargrove house where she'd been staff and wasn't supposed to speak unless spoken to, the kind in boarding houses where nobody knew each other, and nobody was trying to, the kind alone on the road where the only sound was wind. This silence had a different quality. It was the silence of two people who were thinking their own thoughts and had agreed without discussing it, that was all right. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask," he said. "You said your neighbor passed in February." She paused. "The one who made the bread." "Mrs. Hadley," he said. "Eliza Hadley. She was 71. She'd been on this mountain longer than me. Her husband built the property 2 miles south before I was born." He was quiet for a moment. "She used to send her grandson over with a loaf every Sunday." "I'm sorry," Martha said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it right away, and she didn't push. But a few minutes later, without her prompting, he said, "She was the one who told me to buy this land. Said I was being an idiot letting it sit available while I was saving up for something better. Said there is nothing better than land you can stand on." He broke the heel of bread in half and looked at it. She was right. "She sounds like she was a good woman," Martha said. "Best I knew," he said. And then, like the sentence had surprised him, he looked up and added, "Present company considered new to the data." Martha looked at him. He was not smiling exactly, but there was something at the corner of his mouth that was close to it. She looked back at her food. She was not going to smile. She ate her beans. The afternoon was harder. She'd offered to help with the fence posts after dinner, and Caleb had not told her no, and so she found herself on the east side of his property, learning very quickly that setting fence posts was a different kind of work than she'd anticipated. The auger for digging the post holes was heavy and uncooperative in the Rocky Mountain soil, and she got the first hole half dug before her palms started screaming at her. She didn't stop. She didn't say anything about her palms. Caleb was 3 posts ahead of her. He'd started on the far end while she'd started closer to the cabin, and he worked with the ease of a man who'd done this kind of thing 10,000 times, steady and efficient, without any wasted motion. He didn't look over at her. She appreciated that. She didn't need to be watched, but she did need to rest her hands for a moment. She set the auger against her knee and flexed her fingers and looked at her palms and winced. "Let me see," said a voice right beside her. She startled badly. She hadn't heard him come up. He moved quietly for a man his size, which she filed away as information she should have already had. She'd been too focused on the ground in front of her. "I'm fine," she said. "Let me see," he said again, same tone exactly. Not a demand, just a plain statement of what he was going to do. She held out her hands. He took them in both of his gently, which also surprised her given the size and roughness of his own, and looked at her palms. The blisters were just starting at the base of her fingers on the right hand. The left was better. "You've got good calluses already," he said, "but not auger calluses. Different motion. He released her hands and pulled a pair of leather work gloves from his back pocket and held them out to her. "These'll be too big, but it's better than nothing." "What about your hands?" she said. "Mine are already ruined," he said without any self-pity in it. "Have been for years." She took the gloves. They were too big as promised. She tucked the fingers down as best she could and went back to the auger. The work went better after that. Or rather, her hands went better, and the work remained exactly as difficult as it had been, which was considerable. By the time the light started going, and Caleb said they'd done enough for today, they had 6 new posts set, and Martha's back was having a serious conversation with her about choices she had made. She didn't let on about the back either. Walking back toward the cabin, she caught him looking at her once, just a glance, quick and not unkind, like he was calculating something. "You don't complain," he said. "Complaining doesn't move the work," she said. "No," he agreed. "But most people do it anyway." She thought about that. "I haven't had much of an audience for complaining," she said. "You get used to keeping it to yourself." I was quiet for a few steps. Then, "That's not all good, you know, keeping things to yourself." She glanced at him. I'm not telling you what to do," he said, which was the first time she'd seen him look even slightly uncertain. I notice things. Occupational habit. Living alone long enough you get to reading people because that's all there is to read." He paused. "You hold yourself like somebody's going to take something from you if you give them the chance." Martha stopped walking. He stopped too and looked at her and seemed to realize something. "I've overstepped," he said. "No," she said slowly. "You haven't." She considered the words carefully. "You're not wrong." He looked at her. She looked back. "Something happened in Claremont," she said, "before I left." "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I know I don't have to," she said. And she heard the echo of the words, the same ones she'd said to him that afternoon, about helping with the dinner, and something in his expression told her he heard it too. She started walking again. He fell into step beside her. "I worked for a family there," she said. "The Hargroves. Decent people, I thought, for nearly 2 years. She felt the old tightening in her chest that came when she let herself go back to it. The husband lost the house. Back taxes, bad investments. It was a mess. I understood that. I wasn't going to hold the man's bad luck against him. She breathed. But when he let me go, he also told the families I might have applied to next that I had a habit of... She stopped. Started again. He said I wasn't trustworthy, specifically about money. He said there were things that had gone missing. She heard Caleb's footstep catch just a fraction barely perceptible. Things that hadn't, she said. I didn't take anything. I had never taken anything from anyone in my life. But he said it, and he said it to the right people, and by the time I knew what was happening, there was no position in Claremont that would have me. She kept her voice even. She had practiced keeping it even on this particular story. I don't know why he did it. Maybe he was embarrassed about the money trouble and wanted something else to point at. Maybe he just... I don't know. People do things sometimes, and there's no explanation that makes sense. Caleb was quiet for a long time. That's a hell of a thing, he said finally. Yes, she said. It is. And the letter you were reading this morning, he said carefully, like he was deciding whether to mention it, the one you put back in your coat pocket when you came outside. That was from someone who knew. She looked at him sharply. You saw that. I wasn't watching you, he said. I looked up to say good morning, and you were already folding it away. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have mentioned it. My brother, she said after a beat. He heard what Hargrove said, believed it. She said it simply. It still hurt. She let it be simple, and let it hurt in the background where it belonged. He suggested I try Denver, which is either very helpful or a way of telling me I'm not welcome without having to say so. I haven't figured out which yet. Maybe both, Caleb said. People can want to help and not know how at the same time. She looked at him. That's more generous than he probably deserves, she said. Maybe, he said, but it costs less to be generous. They reached the cabin. He held the door. She went in and went to the cook stove and began doing the things that needed doing for supper, because she needed something to do with her hands, and he washed up at the basin and then came and stood a decent distance back and said, for what it's worth. You don't have to, she said. I know, he said. For what it's worth, I've dealt with a lot of people in 11 years up here. Buyers, sellers, workers, neighbors. I've been cheated twice and I've learned to read the signs of it. He paused. You don't have any of those signs. She stood at the cook stove with her back to him. You don't know me, she said. You've known me one day. That's true, he said. You're taking my word for it. I am, he said. She turned to look at him. He was standing by the table with his arms loose at his sides, not defensive, not performing sincerity, just standing there telling her a plain thing. Why? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Because you held out your hands this afternoon when I asked to see them. You didn't want to. You were embarrassed about the blisters, but you did it anyway. He paused. People who are used to hiding things don't do that. They protect. They deflect. You didn't. Martha turned back to the stove. She stirred the pot that didn't need stirring. After a moment, she said very quietly to the pot and the stove and the kitchen that wasn't hers, Thank you, Mr. Ward. Caleb, he said. She stirred the pot. Thank you, Caleb, she said. He sat down at the table. She finished making supper. They ate, and later, much later, when she was back in the room with the key locked in the door from her side and the quilt pulled up and the darkness full around her, Martha Gaines lay still and thought about what it meant that she had told a stranger in one day what she hadn't managed to say out loud to anyone since Claremont. What it meant that he had listened without deciding. What it meant that she was angry at herself for feeling safer than she should, because she knew better than this. She knew better than to let warmth in too fast. She knew what warmth could turn into when the cold came back, and the cold always came back, and she had learned that lesson in the Hargrove house, and she was not going to unlearn it in a mountain cabin, just because a man left her breakfast covered on a table and gave her his good leather gloves. She was not going to unlearn it. But she was also, she noticed, still warm. She closed her eyes. She slept again for the second night in a row. And in the morning, the fence posts were still waiting, and she got up early this time before Caleb, she thought though she couldn't be certain, and made coffee, and stood at the window with her cup, and watched the light come up over the pines, and felt something she could not yet afford to name, beginning very slowly, and against her better judgment, to take root somewhere underneath all her good reasons to leave. The coffee was ready when Caleb came in from the barn. He stopped when he saw it, the pot on the stove, the 2 cups already on the table. Martha standing at the window with her hands wrapped around hers like she was cold, which she probably was, because the mornings up here still bit even in summer. He didn't say anything about it. He just poured himself a cup and stood on the other side of the window and drank it. Fence posts today, she said. East side's done, he said. North side next. How many be 14 posts? Soil's softer up there, though. Shouldn't take as long. She nodded. She finished her coffee. She put her cup in the basin and went to get the gloves he'd lent her. She'd left them on the shelf by the door the night before, neatly where she'd found them, and she was already reaching for the door when he said, Martha. She turned. He was looking at his cup. You didn't have to make the coffee, he said. I know, she said. He looked up then, and something passed between them, brief and wordless, the kind of thing that doesn't have a name yet because it's too new, and then she opened the door and went outside, and the moment closed behind her, like water over a stone. The north side was harder than Caleb had made it sound. The soil was softer, yes, but the posts were longer up here, and the ground sloped enough that every one of them had to be leveled by eye, which meant checking and adjusting and checking again, which meant the work was slower, more precise, and considerably more irritating than just driving things into flat earth. Martha learned the leveling system by watching Caleb do the first 3, and then did the 4th herself, while he watched without commentary. And when she got it right on the 2nd adjustment, he simply moved on to the 5th post, and that was that. She realized, being trusted, not praised, not encouraged in the way people encouraged someone they expected to fail. Just trusted, given the task, and expected to do it. It was a strange feeling. She'd had it before, but not often and not recently. By mid-morning, they had 7 posts set, and Martha's back was making the same complaints as the day before, which she was learning to negotiate, rather than ignore short breaks, standing straight, shifting how she held the auger. She was adapting. Her hands inside the two big gloves were doing better. She was thinking about lunch, what she'd make, whether the dried beans needed to be started now or later, when she heard the horse. She didn't register it consciously at first. Horses made noise up here sometimes. Caleb's roan was in the paddock and occasionally sounded off for no particular reason she could identify. But Caleb straightened up from the post he was tamping and turned toward the south trail, and something in the way he did it quiet and still. The kind of still that meant paying attention made her turn too. There were two of them. Two riders coming up the trail, moving at a pace that was not casual, not fast either, deliberate, the kind of pace that said they knew exactly where they were going. Martha felt the old tightening start in her chest. The brace yourself tightening. Caleb stepped forward so that he was slightly in front of her. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough. She noticed. The riders pulled up at the edge of the property. Two men, one older, heavy through the middle with a coat that was too nice for mountain work and an expression that was used to getting what it came for. The other younger, quieter, watching with flat eyes that went from Caleb to Martha and back again with the practiced assessment of someone who was being paid to notice things. Ward, the older man said. He didn't tip his hat. Garrison, Caleb said. The name landed differently in the open air. Martha saw Caleb's jaw tighten fractionally the first time she'd seen him look anything other than completely steady, and filed that away. Didn't know you had company, Garrison said. His eyes went to Martha. They did the same thing men's eyes usually did, moved over her catalog, decided. This your hired help? This is Martha Gaines, Caleb said. His voice was level and flat and very clear. She works with me. Garrison smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Didn't know you were in the market for extra hands. Must be doing well. Was there something you needed, Garrison? Caleb said. The older man shifted in his saddle. Just being neighborly. Heard you'd been having trouble with the north fence. Thought I'd see if you needed help from town. Don't, Caleb said. A beat of silence. Still thinking about my offer on the east pasture, Garrison said. Still not selling, Caleb said. Another silence. Martha stood very still. She was good at standing still when the room or the field needed it. She watched Garrison's face, and she cataloged what she saw there, because she had learned to read faces, and what she read in his was not neighborliness. It was not even particularly well disguised. It was the face of a man who wanted something, and was not accustomed to not getting it, and was currently calculating what the most efficient path to it might be. His eyes came back to her. You from around here, Miss Gaines, he said. No, she said. Where from? East, she said. She kept her voice pleasant. She'd had practice at pleasant. Traveling through working, she said. Garrison nodded slowly, like she'd said something interesting when she hadn't. Work's hard to come by for a woman traveling alone, he said. Lucky Ward here took you on. He paused, and she heard the shape of what was coming before it arrived. Course some folks in town might wonder about the arrangement. The air changed. Martha felt it change, and she also felt Caleb go very still beside her in a way that was different from his usual stillness. This stillness had an edge to it. I'd be careful about wondering out loud, Caleb said. His voice was quiet, quieter than usual. It's a long way to come back up this mountain to correct a misunderstanding. Garrison held up one hand in a gesture of peace that was not peaceful. Just making an observation, he said. No offense to the lady. None taken, Martha said before Caleb could speak. She stepped slightly forward, not much, just enough to be beside him, rather than behind him, and she looked up at Garrison with the same pleasant expression she'd been holding and said, I appreciate your concern, Mr. Garrison. I'll be sure to think of you if I need the opinion of a man who rode 4 miles to give it to me unsolicited. A beat of absolute silence. The younger rider made a sound that might have been a laugh quickly converted to a cough. Garrison looked at her. Something moved through his expression. Surprise, recalculation, a flash of something less pleasant underneath, and then he pulled his horse around. Ward, he said by way of goodbye. Garrison, Caleb said. They rode back down the trail. Martha watched them go. Beside her, Caleb didn't move until they were out of sight, and then he let out a breath, slow, controlled, and turned to look at her. That, he said, was either very brave or very unwise. Can't it be both? She said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine, the kind that arrives before a person has time to decide whether to let it out. It transformed his face completely. She hadn't been prepared for that. She looked back at the fence line. "Who is he?" she said. The laugh faded, but the something lighter remained briefly before he answered. "Douglas Garrison," he said. "He owns the biggest spread in the valley below. He's been trying to buy my east pasture for 2 years because it sits between his land and the water rights on Miller Creek. He can't get to the water without it. He can, it's just less convenient. Garrison doesn't like inconvenient." Caleb picked up the auger. He's not used to being told no. "What happens if he keeps pushing?" Caleb looked at her sideways. "He'll push," he said. "He's been pushing. But this land is mine clear and deeded, and I know every line of that document." He settled the auger against the next mark. "A man can't take what's properly yours if you know your rights well enough to hold them." Martha thought about the Hargroves, about back taxes and paperwork and things that happened to property when the people who owned it weren't watching carefully enough. "You're sure the deed is clean?" she said. He looked at her, not offended, just curious. "Why?" "Men like Garrison," she said carefully. "They usually have a plan that doesn't require you to agree. They just need the right paperwork to make it look like you did." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "What do you know about that kind of plan?" She met his eyes. "More than I'd like to." He held her gaze. She could see him deciding something, whether to push, whether to let it sit. "Tell me," he said. So she told him. Not everything. Not the full humiliation of it, but the mechanics of what had happened in Claremont. Not just to her, but to the Hargroves. The back taxes that had appeared from nowhere, the paperwork that none of them had understood until too late. The man from the county office who'd been very apologetic and very firm, and who Martha had later realized was being paid by the same people who'd bought the property at auction 3 months later for 1/4 of its value. Caleb listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You understood what was happening while it was happening." "Not fast enough to stop it," she said. "But you saw it." "I saw pieces of it," she said. "I didn't have access to the documents. I was the cook. Nobody showed me the paperwork." "If you had seen it," he said, "what would you have looked for?" She looked at him steadily. "Are you asking me to look at your deed?" "I'm asking if you know what to look for," he said. "I know some things," she said slowly. "I learned things in Claremont. Not formally, I wasn't educated in law. But I paid attention." "Then I'm asking," he said, "if you're willing." That evening, instead of sitting across the table after supper, making quiet conversation, Caleb spread 3 documents across the table. The original land deed, a letter from the county assessor's office that had arrived 2 months ago, and that he admitted he hadn't fully understood, and a survey map with boundary lines marked in faded ink. Martha looked at all 3 for a long time without speaking. She asked him for a lamp. He brought it. She held it close to the assessor's letter and read it twice, and then read it a 3rd time. "This line," she said, pointing. "Right here. This language about boundary reassessment pending survey verification. Did anyone come to survey the property?" Caleb frowned. "A man came in March," he said. "Said he was from the county. I let him walk the east line. He said it was routine." Martha set the lamp down. "It may not be," she said. "This kind of language pending survey verification, it can be used to create a dispute about where your property line actually sits. If the survey comes back with a different boundary than what's in your deed, even by a small amount, it creates a legal question. And legal questions cost money to resolve, and sometimes people sell rather than fight." Caleb looked at the letter. She watched something shift in his face, not panic, but recognition. The recognition of a man who has just been shown the shape of a trap he was already standing in. "The east pasture," he said. "If the boundary moves even 50 feet west," Martha said carefully, What's the impact on the water access? Miller Creek runs along the east edge, he said. 50 feet west, and the creek sits outside my line. Silence. He doesn't need you to sell, Martha said. He just needs the survey to move the line. Caleb sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and said nothing for a long moment. She could see him working through it. The timeline, the man in March, the letter Garrison's visit today, the seemingly neighborly offer on the east pasture. How do I stop it? He said. You need to know what that survey actually said, she said. The letter references a survey report. Do you have a copy? No. You're entitled to one, she said. It's your land. You can request it from the county office, and you need someone to compare it line by line against the original deed description and the original survey, if one exists. He looked at her. Can you do that? She was quiet for a moment. I'm not a lawyer, she said. I'm not asking for a lawyer, he said. I'm asking if you can do that. She looked at the deed on the table, the careful formal language of it, the boundary descriptions, meets and bounds, compass bearings, distances measured in chains. She'd spent 3 months in Claremont teaching herself to read documents like this after the Hargrove house was gone, because she'd decided that she would never again watch something happen around her that she didn't understand and couldn't see coming. Yes, she said. I can do that. He nodded. Once. The same way he'd nodded when they'd agreed to the week's work, like a man settling a debt. Then we'll need to go to town, he said. County office is in Harlow's Crossing. The name hit her like a fist to the sternum. She kept her face still. I can't go to Harlow's Crossing, she said. He looked at her. She hadn't told him about the man on the porch, the loud, easy laughter, the look on his face when she'd walked away down the road. She told him now. When she finished, Caleb's face was very quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't absence of feeling. His name, he said. His voice was the same as always, low level, but there was something under it that wasn't there before. I don't know it, she said. He was older, gray beard, red face, sitting on the porch of the general store. I know who that is, Caleb said. She waited. He talks like that to a lot of people, Caleb said. Women especially, women who are alone. I was quiet for a moment. I should have been in town more. It's not your responsibility, she said. No, he said. But it's still true. She looked at the documents on the table. She looked at her own hands, which had set fence posts today and were calloused in new places already, and where she realized more capable than they'd been 2 weeks ago. More capable than she'd known. If I go to Harlow's Crossing with you, she said, I won't be invisible. He'll see me. He'll say something. Probably, Caleb said. And you want to go anyway. I want to get that survey report, he said. And I'd like you to be there when I read it, because apparently you understand it better than I do. He met her eyes across the documents. What he says doesn't change what needs doing. She held his gaze. She thought about the trail into Harlow's Crossing, about keeping her back straight and her jaw set, about crying a full mile down the road where no one could see her. She thought about what it would feel like to walk back into that town next to a man who knew what had happened and was going anyway. Different, she thought. It would feel different. When? She said. Day after tomorrow, he said. We finish the north fence tomorrow, and then we go. She nodded. She began folding the documents with careful hands. Martha, he said. She looked up. What he said to you in Harlow's Crossing, Caleb said. It was wrong. I want you to know I understand that it was wrong. Not just rude wrong. About you and about... He paused, and she could see him choosing his words with the same precision he brought to fence post leveling. A woman's size is not a measure of her worth. Any man who thinks it is doesn't know much about worth. She was quiet for a moment. You didn't have to say that, she said. No, he said. But I wanted to. She put the folded documents back on the table and stood up and carried the lamp to the other end of the table so she didn't have to look at his face while she said, Caleb, I need you to understand something. All right, he said. I'm good at holding myself together, she said. I've gotten very good at it. But there are things, she stopped. Tried again. There are things I haven't let myself think about in a long time, because if I think about them, I'm not sure I can keep doing that. The holding together. She set the lamp down carefully. And you keep saying things that make the thinking harder to avoid. A long silence. I'm sorry, he said. I can stop. That's not what I'm asking you to do, she said. And then she caught herself, because she wasn't sure what she was asking him to do, or if she was asking him to do anything at all, or if she was just trying to explain something she didn't have words for yet, and making a mess of it. She turned to face him. He was looking at her across the table with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Open in a way he didn't usually let himself be. Careful, but open. I don't know what I'm saying, she said. You're saying it's getting harder to leave, he said quietly. The sentence landed in the middle of the room, and neither of them moved. She should have disagreed. She had 12 good reasons to disagree, and a letter in her coat pocket that was supposed to be pointing her toward Denver, and a life that needed rebuilding in a direction that did not run through a mountain cabin with a man she had known for 4 days. I have to go to Denver, she said. I know, he said. I have maybe family there. I know, he said. And you have a property to protect and a legal fight building, and you don't need... Martha, he said. She stopped. I know all of that, he said. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm telling you I hear what you're saying, that it's harder. He was quiet. It's harder for me too. The fire in the hearth had burned down to coals. Outside the wind had come up again through the pines. The documents on the table held all the evidence of a trap being built around a man who'd worked 11 years to own the ground he stood on. Martha picked up the lamp. She walked to the door of the spare room. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. Day after tomorrow, she said. Harlow's Crossing. Day after tomorrow, he said. She went into her room. She locked the door. She sat on the edge of the bed in the lamplight, and she held the key in both hands, and she let herself think about all the things she'd been not thinking about for longer than she could count. About worth. About what she deserved. About what it meant that the hardest part of this week wasn't the fence posts, or the road dust, or the blisters on her hands. The hardest part was the growing, terrifying possibility that she had been wrong about herself. That she wasn't just a woman holding herself together against the cold. That there was something inside her that was not merely surviving. Something that, given the right conditions, might actually want more than survival. She blew out the lamp. In the dark, she held the key. And she thought Denver. 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 But even the word was starting to sound in the quietest part of her less like a destination, and more like an excuse. They finished the north fence the next day in near silence, and it was not the comfortable silence of the evenings at the table. It was the silence of two people who had said something true the night before, and were now living in the space that truth had made, which was both larger and more uncertain than the space before it. Martha worked. She didn't let herself stop working. The posts went in clean and straight, and she leveled each one with the same precision Caleb had shown her, and she did not look at him more than necessary, and she did not let herself think about anything beyond the next post, the next measurement, the next adjustment. He was doing the same thing. She could tell. There was something in the way he moved that was more deliberate than usual, like a man who was keeping himself occupied on purpose. They ate lunch without much conversation. They went back out. By late afternoon, the fence was done, all 14 posts, wire strung and tensioned. The north boundary of Caleb Ward's property, secured against whatever came next, and they stood back and looked at it, and Martha felt the particular satisfaction of finished work, the clean, uncomplicated pleasure of something that had not existed before and now did because she had made it so. Good fence, Caleb said. Good fence, she agreed. They walked back to the cabin. Neither of them mentioned the night before. Neither of them mentioned Denver. They ate supper, and Martha washed up, and Caleb read at the table by lamplight, and around 9 o'clock she went to her room and locked her door and lay on the bed without undressing and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. Denver, she thought. Tomorrow. She got up before dawn. She dressed carefully. She'd washed her dress 2 days ago in the basin and dried it by the stove, and it was as decent as it was going to get, which was still worn and faded but clean, and she pinned her hair up the way she did when she wanted to look like a woman who had her affairs in order, which she had learned was a slightly different technique than just pinning it up. She looked at herself in the small mirror and made some decisions about her expression and went out. Caleb had the wagon ready. He was hitching the roan in the gray pre-dawn light when she came out of the cabin, and he looked up and took her in the pinned hair, the set of her shoulders, the look she'd decided on, and he nodded once, the way he did when something met his assessment. "Ready," he said. "Ready," she said. She climbed up onto the wagon seat without assistance, because she didn't need it, and because Harlow's crossing was ahead of them, and she was going to need all the steadiness she had. The road down the mountain was an hour and a half. They talked some practical things mostly, what they were looking for in the survey report, what questions to ask the county clerk, how to request the document without giving Garrison's office any indication of why they wanted it, in case the connection ran further than they knew. Martha had thought about this the night before, while she was staring at the ceiling, and she laid out the approach methodically, and Caleb listened and asked two sharp questions, and they refined it between them until they had something that felt solid. It was, she thought not, unlike planning the fence work. Assess the situation, identify the problem, determine the most efficient approach, execute. She was good at this. She was good at the thinking through problems part. She'd always been good at it, and she'd spent most of her adult life in positions where nobody asked for that particular skill because she was the cook, and cooks were for cooking, not for thinking. It was a specific kind of loneliness she'd found to be capable of things no one was asking you to do. "You're quiet," Caleb said. "I'm thinking," she said. "About the survey report. About other things," she said. And then, because she'd decided somewhere around 4 in the morning that she was going to be honest today, that Harlow's crossing required it, that walking back into that town required her to be honest about what she was walking into, and why, she said, about what it's going to feel like to walk down that street. "Difficult," Caleb said. "Yes." "And necessary," he said. "Yes," she said. "That too." How was quiet for a moment. Then, "If anyone says anything, I'll handle it," she said. "I know you will," he said. "That's not what I was going to say." He kept his eyes on the road. "I was going to say, let me be there. I'm not going to fight your battles. But let me be standing next to you when it happens, so you're not standing alone." She looked at his profile. The jaw, the steadiness of his hands on the reins, the way he said things like that with no performance in them, like they were just the obvious next thing to say. "All right," she said. Harlow's crossing was bigger than she remembered, which was strange because she'd only been there 4 days ago. But when you passed through a town at the bottom of your resources with hunger, making everything feel smaller and meaner, and then came back to it, fed and rested, and sitting up on a wagon seat next to a man who owned land, it looked different. Not better. It was still a dusty, mid-sized nothing of a town with too many opinions, and not enough to do, but larger. More navigable. The porch of the general store was occupied as it had been the first time. Different men, she thought, though one of them had the same particular posture of men who sit on porches and consider themselves appointed judges of the street. She didn't look for the gray beard. She kept her eyes forward. Caleb drove the wagon past the store without slowing, and she felt the eyes on them on her, specifically the recognition of a face, the nudge and murmur that she was too far away to hear, but close enough to feel, and she breathed through her nose and kept her spine straight and did not look back. The county office was on the far end of the main street. Caleb tied the horse and they went in. The county clerk was a small man with ink-stained fingers and the tightly organized expression of someone who dealt with paperwork for a living and had strong opinions about people who didn't. He looked up when they came in. His eyes went to Caleb first standard and then to Martha, and she could see the brief recalibration as he tried to determine her role in whatever this visit was going to be. "Help you," he said. "I own land north of town," Caleb said. "Deeded 11 years ago. I received a letter from this office regarding a boundary survey, and I'd like a copy of the survey report." The clerk looked at him for a moment. "Name? Caleb Ward. Property reference number is on this." He set the assessor's letter on the counter. The clerk picked it up, read it, put it back down. "Survey was conducted March 14th, he said. Report is filed." "I'd like a copy," Caleb said. The clerk looked at the letter again. "Standard processing time for document requests is 10 days. Martha stepped forward. "The letter specifies that any boundary disputes arising from the survey are subject to immediate resolution procedures," she said, and she kept her voice pleasant and her eyes direct. "Which would mean the documentation supporting those procedures should be available for review by the affected property owner." She paused. "We're happy to wait while you pull the file." The clerk looked at her. "You're the property owner," he said. "I'm the property owner," Caleb said from beside her. "She's helping me understand the documentation." The clerk's gaze moved between them. He picked up the letter again. He put it back down. He disappeared through a door at the back. Martha looked at Caleb. He was watching the door the clerk had gone through with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Did you know that language was in there?" he said quietly. "I read the letter 4 times last night," she said. He looked at her. "I couldn't sleep," she said. The clerk came back with a folder. He set it on the counter and opened it with the air of a man who was doing them a favor and wanted them to know it. And Martha stepped forward and began reading before he could add any caveats about what they were allowed to look at. The survey report was 12 pages. She went through it systematically, which was the only way to go through a document like this, starting with the property reference, confirming it matched, then moving to the boundary descriptions, and comparing them against the original deed language that she'd memorized the night before, because that was the kind of person she was when something needed understanding. Page 4. She went still. She read the paragraph twice. Then she pointed at it wordlessly, and Caleb leaned in and read it. The surveyor had noted in careful bureaucratic language that was clearly written by someone who knew how to say a significant thing in an insignificant way. A discrepancy between the original deed boundary on the east side and the results of the March survey. The original deed placed the eastern boundary at a specific bearing and distance from a surveying mark. The March survey placed the same mark at a different location 22 feet from where the deed said it should be, 22 feet west, which put Miller Creek outside Caleb's property line. "This is it," Martha said quietly. "The mark moved," Caleb said. "Or someone said it did," she said. She looked up at the clerk who was watching them with an expression that was very carefully blank. "The surveying mark referenced in the original deed, the iron stake at the northeast corner, is it noted anywhere in this report that it was physically located and confirmed?" The clerk blinked. "Is there documentation that the surveyor actually found the original iron stake?" she said. "Or did he establish a new reference point and call it the same thing?" A long silence. "I'd have to check the surveyor's field notes," the clerk said. "Please," she said. I went back through the door. This time he was gone longer. When he came back, his expression had changed. He was holding a single sheet of paper, and he looked like a man who had found something he wasn't certain he wanted to have found. "The field notes indicate the original stake was not located," he said. "The surveyor established a new reference point at the presumed location." "Presumed." "Presumed based on what?" Martha said. "It doesn't specify," the clerk said. The word sat on the counter between them like something that had been dropped. Martha looked at Caleb. He was very still. His hand on the counter was flat and steady, and she could see from the set of his jaw that he was doing the same thing she'd done when she found the discrepancy on page 4. Reading it, absorbing it, not reacting until he'd gotten all the way through it. "I need a copy of this entire file," she said to the clerk. "Survey report and field notes, today." "That'll take..." "The property owner is present and requesting documents pertaining to a boundary dispute that has been initiated by this office," she said. "We'll wait." The clerk looked at her. He looked at Caleb. He picked up the file and went back through the door. Caleb turned to face her. "Martha," he said. "They moved the reference point," she said, keeping her voice low, "without locating the original stake. That's not standard practice. You always search for the existing mark before establishing a new one. If they didn't search it, either means the surveyor was incompetent or he was told not to look." "Garrison," Caleb said. "I don't know that," she said. "I don't know who hired the surveyor or what instructions he was given, but I know that this report as it stands could be used to legally redraw your eastern boundary." She held his gaze. "Caleb, If someone files a boundary claim based on this survey before you can challenge it, you could lose that east pasture in court, without ever being asked to sell it. He was quiet for a moment. "Can it be challenged?" he said. "Yes," she said. "If we can prove the original iron stake exists at the location described in your deed, the survey report loses its foundation. The whole thing falls apart." She paused. "The stake, do you know if it's still there?" "I've walked that east line 100 times," he said. "There's a stake. I've seen it." "Then we need someone to verify it. An independent surveyor. Someone who isn't connected to whoever Garrison used." She paused. "And we need a lawyer. I know a lawyer," he said. "2 towns over. Emmett Shaw. He's dealt with land disputes before. Can you reach him quickly?" "I can ride to him tomorrow," he said. The clerk came back with the copied documents in a folder. Martha took them. She checked the copies against the originals page by page, making the clerk wait, because she was not going to leave that office with an incomplete set of documents. When she was satisfied, she thanked the clerk in the same pleasant voice she'd been using throughout, and turned and walked to the door. Outside on the street, the air hit her, and she realized her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear. From the sustained effort of holding her voice steady, and her expression neutral, and her thoughts organized for the past 40 minutes, while what she was reading told her that a man's 11 years of work was being quietly legally stolen from underneath him. Caleb came out behind her. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder, just a touch, just a second, then gone, and she understood it for what it was. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," she said. "You angry?" he said. "Good," she said. "Angry is useful. Anger is information about what matters." He looked at her. "Where'd you hear that?" he said. "I made it up just now," she said. "But I believe it." Something in his expression shifted the anger still there, but something else alongside it, something that looked like gratitude, but was deeper than that, more specific, the kind that comes not from what someone has done for you, but from who they have shown themselves to be in the doing of it. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. They started back toward the wagon. They were halfway down the main street when she heard it. The voice loud, carrying, designed to carry, coming from the direction of the general store porch. "Well, look at that." She found herself a man. She kept walking, her spine straight, her steps, even the folder of documents tucked under her arm. "That's the one from last week, the one walking around looking for handouts." A pause, calculated. Guess she found something worth staying for. The laughter that followed was the same as she remembered. The same easy, assured cruelty of men who have never been laughed at on a public street and cannot imagine what it costs. She kept walking. Beside her, Caleb stopped. She didn't stop. She took 2 more steps before she realized he wasn't with her, and then she turned. He was standing in the middle of the street facing the porch, and he was very still. His hands were at his sides. He was not reaching for anything. He didn't need to. There was something in the quality of his stillness that communicated itself across the distance clearly enough that the laughter on the porch had already stopped. "I know you," Caleb said. His voice was not loud. It carried anyway. "Howard Beale, you've been sitting on that porch making loud observations about people passing by for as long as I've known this town." A beat of silence. "I'm Caleb Ward," he said. "I own the North Mountain property. I buy my grain from this store and my hardware from the shop next to it, and I've given this town my business for 11 years. He paused. "Martha Gaines works with me. She's more capable and more honest than anyone who spent this week on that porch, and if I hear her name said sideways in this town again, I'll take my business to Creekside and tell every man I know to do the same." Another pause. "We clear silence on the porch. We clear Howard," Caleb said, a voice considerably smaller than before. "Clear." Caleb turned and walked back to Martha. She was standing in the street with the folder under her arm, and she was looking at him, and she was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to cry in the middle of the main street of Harlow's Crossing, in front of Howard Beale and his porch, and the people who had gathered on the edges of the street to watch. She was not. "Let's go," Caleb said quietly. She turned and walked with him to the wagon. He helped her up this time. She let him. She sat on this wagon seat and held the documents folder in both hands and looked straight ahead, and he climbed up and took the reins and clicked the horse forward, and they moved down the street and around the bend and out of Harlow's Crossing, and she did not look back. After a while, Caleb said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask first. Whether you wanted—" "Don't apologize," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "Please don't apologize for that." He was quiet. "How long has that been happening to you?" he said. "People saying things like that?" She thought about it. How far back the answer went. "Since I can remember," she said. "You learn to walk through it." "You shouldn't have to," he said. "No," she said. "But the world doesn't organize itself around what people should have to do." The wagon moved up the mountain road. The pines closed around them. The noise of the town fell away behind them, and the silence came back, but different now, changed in a way she couldn't fully articulate. "Caleb," she said. "What you said back there," she said. "About hearing my name said sideways." She paused. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "People will talk. About us. About the arrangement." She glanced at him. "You understand that?" "Let them," he said. She looked at him. "It could affect your business, your reputation. If people start speculating about—" "Martha," he said. He looked at her just briefly before his eyes went back to the road. "There's nothing about you living and working in my house that I'm ashamed of. If someone finds a story in that says more about them than it does about us." Us. The word was out there now between them on the wagon seat, and neither of them pointed at it. She looked down at the documents folder in her hands. "I'm going to write up a summary of what we've found," she said. "The discrepancy, the field notes, the standard survey procedure that wasn't followed. Something your lawyer can use when he sees the documents." "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," she said. He nodded. He looked at the road. She looked at the folder. After a long moment, he said quietly, "You know you could—" "Caleb," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not going to say it." "Good," she said. A pause. "Denver," she said, not to him, or not only to him. "Denver," he agreed. And the way he said it quietly, carefully, with a gentleness that did not argue, made her feel it more, not less. The way you feel a weight more clearly when someone handles it with care rather than dropping it. They were halfway up the mountain when the other rider appeared on the trail behind them, moving fast, overtaking them. Martha heard it before she saw it. The fast-moving hoofbeats on the mountain road, and she felt Caleb's hands tighten slightly on the reins before he deliberately relaxed them. She was already turning to look. The rider pulled up alongside the wagon. Young man, younger than she'd realized from a distance when she'd seen him before. It was the second rider from Garrison's visit. The quiet one with the flat eyes who'd made the sound that might have been a laugh. He looked at Martha directly, not at Caleb, at her. "Miss," he said, "I got something to say, and I'd rather say it quick and be gone." "Then say it," Caleb said. The young man kept his eyes on Martha. "Mr. Garrison knows you went to the county office today," he said. "He's got someone in that office who tells him things." He paused. "He also knows what you probably found." Martha felt the air go very still. "How does he know what we found?" she said. "Because he knows what's in that report," the young man said. "He commissioned it." He looked uncomfortable, the look of a man saying something he'd talked himself into saying and wasn't entirely sure he wasn't going to regret. "He's going to file a boundary claim. His lawyer is drawing up the paperwork today, and it'll be filed by end of week." "Why are you telling us this?" Caleb said. The young man looked at him then. "Mrs. Hadley," he said. "Eliza Hadley. She was my grandmother." The silence on the road was complete. "She talked about you," the young man said to Caleb. "About your land. About what it meant to build something on a mountain and hold it." He shifted in the saddle. "She wouldn't have liked what Garrison's doing." Caleb was very quiet. "No," he said. "She wouldn't have." The young man looked at Martha again. "You read those documents fast," he said. "You knew what you were looking at." "Yes," she said. "The original iron stake," he said. There's a property sketch, old one drawn when Ward's deed was filed, that shows the stake's exact position relative to a rock formation on the east line. Original surveyor's reference. It's in the deed filing at the land registry office, not the county office, the land registry. He held her eyes. That sketch would prove where the stake should be. Martha's mind was already moving. "Where's the land registry?" she said. "Fort Crane," he said. "Day's ride southeast." He looked at both of them once more. Then he turned his horse and rode back down the trail and was gone around the bend before either of them had spoken. Martha and Caleb sat on the wagon in the middle of the mountain road. "His grandmother made you bread every Sunday," she said. "Every Sunday," Caleb said. "Fort Crane," she said. "Day's ride," he said. She looked at the folder in her hands. She thought about the lawyer 2 towns over, Emmett Shaw, who dealt with land disputes, and the survey report, and the iron stake, and the property sketch, and the boundary claim being drawn up today by Garrison's lawyer, who already had a week's head start. She thought about the letter in her coat pocket. She thought about Denver. And then she made a decision so quietly that she almost missed making it. Not a dramatic thing, not a door slamming or a road chosen at a crossroads, but a simple interior, settling the way water finds its level without any ceremony at all. "Tomorrow," she said. "You ride to your lawyer. I'll start writing the summary. When you get back, we decide about Fort Crane." Caleb looked at her. She kept her eyes on the road ahead. "Together," he said. "Together," she said. I didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The wagon moved up the mountain, and Martha Gaines, who had come to this road looking for a night in a barn and a way out of a life that had stopped making room for her, held on to the seat with one hand and the documents folder with the other, and she did not look back at the bend where the trail to Denver split off south. Not once. She wrote until midnight. The summary started as 3 pages and became 6. Because once she started pulling the threads apart, she found they went further than she'd initially seen, and the further she followed them, the cleaner the picture became, and the cleaner the picture became. The angrier she got, and the anger made her writing sharper and more precise, which was the only useful thing anger was good for in her experience. So she let it do its work. The fraudulent survey, the missing field notes, the deliberate failure to locate the original iron stake, the timing. Garrison's visit to the property the same week the assessor's letter arrived, which was not coincidence, which was a man checking on the progress of something he'd set in motion. She laid it out in plain language, the way you'd explain something to a person who was smart, but had never seen this particular trick before, because that was who Emmett Shaw was going to be, and she needed him to see it the way she saw it, clearly and without room for doubt. She also wrote a second document, shorter. A timeline starting from the March survey and moving forward to the present day, with every relevant date noted and every relevant party identified. She'd learned in Claremont that lawyers liked timelines. It organized the shape of what had happened in a way that was harder to argue with than narrative alone. Caleb came out of his room once around 10 o'clock and stood in the doorway and looked at what she was doing. "Come to bed," he said. "Not yet," she said. He looked at the pages spread across the table. He looked at her face. "I'll make coffee," he said. He made coffee. He set a cup beside her without disturbing the papers and went back to his room, and she heard the door close, not all the way, just enough, and she went back to writing. When she finally set down the pen, it was past midnight, and the fire had burned to coals, and her hand ached in a way that was specific to sustained writing. Different from the fence post ache, different from the road walking ache. She stacked the pages and read through them once more, caught 2 things she wanted to reword, rewrote them. She went to bed. She did not sleep the way she'd slept the first night. She slept lightly at the surface, her mind still turning the documents over in the dark. But she slept. Caleb left before dawn. She heard him go, the quiet movements of a man who knew how to leave without waking people. And she lay still and listened to the sound of the horse leaving the yard, and then the silence that came after. She got up. She made breakfast for one and ate it at the table surrounded by her own pages and thought about Fort Crane, the land registry, the original property sketch, the exact position of the iron stake relative to a rock formation on the east line. If that sketch existed, and she had no reason to doubt the young man's word because he'd had nothing to gain from lying and everything to lose from telling the truth. Then, it was the one document that could definitively disprove the March survey's reference point. Without the sketch, they had a legal argument. With it, they had proof. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. She spent the morning reviewing the deed documents again and annotating the summary with specific page and line references, so Emmett Shaw wouldn't have to search. She was precise in a way that felt good, the same feeling as a level fence post, the same clean satisfaction of a thing done correctly. Around noon she heard a horse in the yard, and she was at the door before she'd consciously decided to move. It wasn't Caleb, it was a boy, 14, maybe 15, with a county office messenger bag and the slightly winded look of someone who'd ridden fast. He held out an envelope. "Martha Gaines," he said. She went still. "Yes." "Letter for you, ma'am. Man in town paid me to bring it up." She took the letter. She turned it over. The handwriting on the front was not familiar, printed, careful, anonymous. No return address. She gave the boy a coin from the small amount Caleb had paid her 2 days ago. Her wages, actual wages, which she'd folded carefully into her coat pocket, and not thought about spending until now, and watched him ride back down the trail. She went inside. She stood at the table and opened the letter. It was one paragraph. Unsigned. "Miss Gaines, you were seen at the county office. Mr. Garrison is aware that you assisted Ward in obtaining the survey documents. He has made inquiries regarding your background and has obtained certain information from a source in Claremont. He intends to use this information to discredit your assistance to Ward in any legal proceeding. Leave the mountain. Whatever Ward is paying you, it is not worth what comes next. This is a warning, not a threat. Take it as such." She read it twice. Then she set it on the table and sat down and pressed both hands flat against the wood and breathed. Claremont. Hargrove's Lies. The story that had closed every door in that town. She isn't trustworthy. Things went missing and apparently had a long enough reach to follow her up a mountain and into a land dispute that had nothing to do with it. Garrison had someone in Claremont. Or he'd sent word and someone had answered. Or he'd simply found the rumor the way people found useful rumors, the way rumors that destroyed women's reputations had a way of being extraordinarily portable. Her hands were flat on the table. She kept them there. She watched them and made sure they were steady. How was going to use it? In court, if it got to court. In front of Emmett Shaw. In front of a judge. A woman with a theft accusation against her name helping a property owner challenge a legal survey. The argument wrote itself. Everything she said, every document she analyzed, every piece of reasoning she brought dismissed by the shadow of a thing that had never been true. She picked up the letter. She read it a third time, and then she got up and put more wood on the fire and started making bread because she needed her hands to do something, and bread was what she knew, and she thought better when her hands were working. She always had. The bread was halfway through its second rise when Caleb came back. She heard him in the yard, heard him put up the horse, heard his boots on the porch. He came in and stopped when he saw her face. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it. She watched him read it, the stillness coming over him that she recognized now as the thing that happened when he was making himself absorb something fully before he reacted. The jaw. The hands loose at his sides. He set the letter on the table. "Emmett Shaw," he said. "Tell me what happened first." She blinked. "What?" "I rode to Shaw today," he said. "Tell me what he said, and then we'll deal with this." He gestured at the letter. "In order." She looked at him. "You want to go in order?" "One thing at a time," he said. "That's how you keep your head when things move fast." She almost smiled. "Shaw," she said. "Tell me." "I wants to see the documents," Caleb said. "He thinks we have grounds to challenge the survey if we can establish the original stake position. He's also contacted a friend in Fort Crane, another lawyer, someone he trusts about the land registry records." He paused. "He said to get to Fort Crane as fast as we can and request the original deed filing. The property sketch should be part of that filing." When does Garrison file the boundary claim? Shaw thinks end of week. Friday at the latest. Today was Tuesday. Fort Crane is a day's ride, she said. We leave tomorrow morning, he said. She looked at him. Read the letter again, Caleb. I read it. If Garrison uses the Claremont story in a legal proceeding, then we deal with it, he said. In that proceeding, it'll undermine everything I've documented, she said. Her voice was level. She'd decided on level. A judge who hears that the woman who analyzed the survey documents has a theft accusation in her background. It doesn't matter that it isn't true. It creates doubt. And in a property dispute, doubt benefits the challenger. Maybe, Caleb said. Or maybe we walk into that courtroom with the original property sketch and the survey comparison and a timeline. So clean, a blind man could read it, and doubt doesn't have anywhere to land. He looked at her across the table. Martha, he sent that letter to scare you off. If it works, he wins without going to court. She looked at the letter on the table. She looked at the bread rising on the board. She looked at her hands. He found out things about me in 2 days, she said. What else can he find? Nothing that's true. True, Caleb said. Truth doesn't always... I know, he said. I know that. I'm not naive about it. He moved, came around the end of the table and stood on the same side as her, not crowding her, but close enough that she could hear the evenness in his breathing and feel the steadiness that came off him, the way heat comes off stone that's been in the sun all day. I'm asking you to stay in it anyway. I'm asking you because without you, I don't know how to read what we're fighting, and because what's in those documents is true, whether Garrison says your name in court or not. The truth doesn't change. She looked up at him. He's threatening me, she said. Yes, he said. To protect a fraud. Yes, he said. And you want me to ride to Fort Crane anyway. I want you to do whatever you decide is right, he said. But I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that the people who threaten other people to protect their frauds are counting on exactly this moment. The moment when someone who knows the truth has to decide if the truth is worth the cost of saying it. He held her eyes. Most of the time people decide it isn't. That's how men like Garrison keep doing what they're doing. She picked up the letter. She folded it once, twice, and held it in her hands, and thought about Harold Hargrove standing in his failing house, inventing a story to protect his pride. Thought about doors closing. Thought about a mile of road where you could cry where no one saw you. Thought about what it cost to be a woman who knew things in a world that wanted her not to. She set the letter in the fire. She watched it burn. I'll have the bread out of the oven by morning, she said. We can take it with us for the road. Caleb Ward looked at her for a long moment, and what was in his face was not relief exactly, or gratitude exactly, but something that had both of those in it and went deeper than either. All right, he said. They left before the sun was fully up, the bread wrapped in cloth in the pack behind the saddle, and they rode hard because they needed the hours, and the road to Fort Crane had 2 sections that slowed you down, whether you wanted to be slowed or not. She rode her own horse, the bay mare that Caleb kept as a second animal, and that turned out to be smooth-gaited and sensible, which Martha appreciated because she hadn't ridden seriously in 2 years, and her body needed a horse that would meet her halfway. The mare did. They understood each other within the first mile, which Martha took as a reasonable sign. They talked as they rode, planning mostly what they'd request from the land registry, how they'd carry the documents, what Shaw needed from Fort Crane, and what he already had. Caleb had sent a wire to Shaw before they left telling him their timeline, and Shaw would be preparing his own materials in parallel, so that when they returned with the sketch, they could move immediately. If the sketch confirms the stake position, Martha said, what's the legal argument? Shaw says we file an emergency injunction to halt the boundary claim pending a full survey review. Caleb said. With the sketch and the survey comparison, and the field notes showing the surveyor never located the original stake, he thinks we can get the injunction. After that, it's a question of getting an independent surveyor out to the east line fast enough to physically confirm the stake. The stake has to actually be there, she said. It's there, he said. I've seen it. When did you last see it? A pause. March, he said, before the surveyor came. Have you checked it since? Another pause. She heard what was in it. If Garrison's man moved it, she started. He'd have had to come onto my property to do it, Caleb said. At night, without me knowing. Is that possible? A longer pause this time. Yes, he said. It's possible. They rode without speaking for a moment. Then we need to check the stake before we file anything, she said. Because if we file the injunction based on the sketch position, and then an independent surveyor goes out there and the stake has been moved, our argument falls apart, he said. And Garrison's fraudulent survey becomes the legal record, she said. He pulled his horse up. She pulled hers up beside him. They looked at each other on the mountain road with Fort Crane ahead of them, and the east pasture behind them, and the clock running on Garrison's lawyer, and his end-of-week filing deadline. We check the stake first, she said. That means going back before Fort Crane, he said. It means going back now, she said. Today. Before we ride all day to get a document that won't help us if the physical evidence has already been tampered with. He turned his horse. She turned hers. They rode back hard. The east pasture was 40 minutes from the cabin at speed, and they made it in 35. Caleb dismounted at the fence line, and she was off her horse right behind him, and they walked the east boundary. The new posts they'd set together solid and straight toward the northeast corner where the iron stake should be. She heard him stop before she saw why. The ground had been disturbed. Not badly, someone who wasn't looking would have walked right past it. But she was looking, and Caleb was looking, and the difference between recently turned earth and settled ground was clear enough once you knew to see it. He moved it, Caleb said. Or tried to, she said. She moved closer. She crouched and looked at the ground without touching anything. Caleb, how deep was the original stake set? 3 feet, he said. When I had the deed filed, the surveyor set it 3 feet in, said it'd outlast the both of us. She looked at the disturbed ground. If someone pulled a 3-foot stake in the dark and rocky mountain soil in a hurry. She looked up. They might not have gotten all of it. He looked at her. She stood up. Do you have a spade at the cabin? They had a spade at the cabin. They retrieved it. They came back. And Caleb Ward dug carefully at the position shown in the original deed description, the exact bearing and distance she'd memorized from the document language while Martha watched, and the wind moved through the fence posts they'd set together, and the afternoon light shifted overhead. At 14 inches, the spade hit iron. They both went still. He dug wider. Cleared the earth carefully with his hands. The iron was a broken shaft clean break, recent, the kind that happened when you applied lateral force to something that was designed to go straight down. Someone had broken it off and moved the top portion. The base was still there, exactly where the deed said it should be, exactly where the original surveyor had placed it 11 years ago. 22 feet east of where Garrison's survey said it was. Martha sat back on her heels and looked at it. Photograph it, she said. Before you touch anything else. Is there anyone in Harlow's Crossing who does photography? There's a man, Caleb said slowly. Daniel Frey. He does portraits, some property documentation. We need him up here today, she said. The broken shaft, the base in situ, the position relative to the fence line. We need visual documentation before anything is disturbed further. She looked at Caleb. And we need an affidavit from you, signed and witnessed, describing what we found and when. That goes with the photographs. He looked at her across the hole in the ground with the iron stake base sitting in it, like evidence of something that had been done to him in the dark. You think like a lawyer, he said. I think like someone who's watched evidence disappear, she said. He stood up. He was already calculating. She could see it. If I ride to Frey now, he said, I can have him here by late afternoon. Then we ride to Fort Crane tonight hard and get the registry document by morning. Shaw needs to know about the stake, she said. Wire him before you ride for Frey. Done, he said. She stayed at the east fence line while he rode. She stayed because she was not going to leave that broken stake unattended, and because she needed the time, and because standing alone on a boundary line with the wind coming through and the evidence of a crime at her feet was strangely one of the clearer moments she'd had in a long time. This was what she was good at. Not cooking, not enduring, not walking through towns with her back straight and her feelings locked down 3 layers deep. This seeing the shape of a thing, following the logic of it, knowing which document mattered And why, knowing that a photograph of a broken stake in the ground was the difference between an argument and a proof. She'd spent 3 years being the cook. Before that, being the help. Useful, capable, valued only for the narrow window of service she was providing at any given moment, and not at all for the mind that was doing it. She thought about the letter she'd burned in Caleb's fireplace, about Garrison finding out things from Claremont, about the story Hargrove had told. She thought, whatever he says about me, I know what I found, and I know what it means, and no one is going to take that from me. Not again. Daniel Frey arrived at 4 in the afternoon, and he was a precise, efficient man who asked no unnecessary questions and took 8 photographs from 4 angles, and then helped Caleb and Martha sign the affidavit that Caleb had already drafted, in a careful hand that turned out, Martha noticed, to be better than she'd expected, clear and exact, the hand of a man who read seriously and had thought carefully about language. They rode to Harlow's Crossing together, left Frey with the photographic plates and instructions for development and safekeeping wired Shaw, with an update that was 3 sentences long and covered everything, and were back on the road to Fort Crane by 6 in the evening. They rode through the dark on horses that knew their riders now, and the stars came out overhead, and neither of them talked much because the riding was enough, and the thinking was enough, and the space between them on that road had changed enough that silence was no longer something to manage. Around midnight, Caleb said, "Are you tired?" "Yes," she said. "You?" "Yes," he said. They rode another hour before he spotted a way station, one of the small stops kept up for travelers on the Fort Crane road, a lean-to and a water trough, and a covered place to rest. They stopped. They watered the horses. They sat with their backs against the lean-to wall and shared the bread she'd made the night before and the dried meat from Caleb's pack. She was so tired her hands felt far away. She ate anyway. "Martha," he said. After this is done," he said. "After the injunction and the survey and whatever comes next in the legal process." He stopped, started again. "I want you to know that whatever you decide about Denver, about where you go, I'm not going to hold anything against you. You came here for one night and you've given me—" He stopped again. "You've changed the outcome of something I would have lost without you." She looked at the bread in her hand. "You would have figured it out," she said. "Maybe," he said. "Not in time." She was quiet. "I haven't written to my cousin," she said. He was quiet too. "The letter from my brother," she said. "The one about Denver. I haven't replied to it either." She breathed. "I've been carrying both of them in my pocket like they're decisions I've already made, but I haven't made them." She looked at the dark road ahead. "I've been afraid to make them." "What are you afraid of?" he said. She thought about it carefully. "That if I stop moving," she said, "I'll see how much I've lost, and it'll be too much to stand." She paused. "It's easier to keep walking toward a maybe than to stop and count what's gone." "And if you stop walking," he said, quietly, "what do you see?" She looked at the road, the stars, the shape of the mountains against the dark sky, the horses standing at the water trough in the quiet of midnight. "I see this," she said, "which is more than I had 3 weeks ago." He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was careful in the way she'd come to recognize careful, not because he was hiding something, but because he was trying to say something exactly right. "Then stay," he said, "not because I need the help, though I do, not because of the land dispute, though that's real." He looked at her across the space between them. "Stay because you stopped here and found something, and you don't have to walk away from it." She looked at him. She thought about the key on the small table in the spare room, the solid click of the bolt sliding home, the first morning she'd made coffee, and he'd come in from the barn and not said anything about it. The bread, the fence posts, the wagon ride to Harlow's Crossing, and what he'd said on that main street, in a voice that was quiet and absolutely final. She thought about a woman who had knocked on a stranger's door with nothing in her hands but desperation and the last scrap of her own nerve, and what that woman had found on the other side. She thought about what she deserved, not what she'd been told she deserved, or what the world had gotten around to offering her, but what she actually deserved, in the plain, clear-eyed reckoning of a woman who had done the work and told the truth and held herself together through everything that had tried to knock her down. More than a barn, she thought. More than a maybe. "All right," she said. 2 words. She said them the same way he said things, without performance, without ceremony. The way you said something when you meant it completely and didn't need it to sound like more than it was. He looked at her. "All right," he said back. Same tone, same weight. They sat there in the dark at the way station on the Fort Crane Road and finished the bread and rested the horses and didn't talk much more because there wasn't much more that needed saying. They reached Fort Crane at dawn. The land registry opened at 8. Martha stood at the counter and requested the original deed filing for property registered to Caleb Ward in the 11th year North Mountain District, and the clerk brought out a folder that was older than most of what she'd handled in this entire process. Fragile at the edges, the ink faded to brown, and inside it, behind the deed copy and the original survey notes, was the property sketch. It was hand-drawn, detailed. It showed the northeast corner iron stake position with a reference bearing to a specific rock formation on the east line, and the numbers matched the deed description exactly, and they were 22 feet east of where Garrison's fraudulent survey said they should be. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at Caleb and she said, "We have it." He looked at the sketch. He looked at her. He put his hand over hers on the counter briefly, completely, and then he straightened up and said, "Let's get copies made." They were back on this road by 9. Shaw had their wire and was waiting. The photographs of the broken stake would be developed by now, the affidavit signed, and witness the evidence whole and documented and ready. They had the sketch. They had the survey comparison. They had the timeline and the field notes, and the story told clearly enough that it couldn't be misread. Garrison filed his boundary claim on Friday. Emmett Shaw filed the emergency injunction on Friday afternoon. The judge reviewing the filing looked at the property sketch and the photographs of the broken stake base still in the ground, and the field notes showing the surveyor had never located the original mark, and he issued the injunction before close of business. The boundary claim was halted pending full review. The independent survey, conducted the following week by a surveyor from 3 counties over, who had no connection to Garrison or anyone who worked for him, located the iron stake base exactly where the original deed said it should be, confirmed the position against the property sketch from the Fort Crane registry, and placed the eastern boundary of Caleb Ward's property precisely where it had always been, 22 feet east of where Douglas Garrison needed it to be. Garrison's lawyer withdrew the boundary claim 8 days later. No statement was issued. No apology was made. Men like Garrison didn't apologize. They simply recalculated and looked for a different angle, and that was a problem for another day. But on the day the claim was withdrawn, Caleb came in from the barn and set a piece of paper on the table in front of Martha while she was working, and she picked it up and read it. It was a letter from Emmett Shaw confirming the withdrawal and noting that in his professional opinion, the documentation and analysis provided had been essential to the outcome. He had recommended to Caleb that the person who had prepared that documentation be formally acknowledged. She set the letter down. "I wants to know," Caleb said, "if you'd be willing to help him with 2 other cases he's handling. Land disputes, both of them. Women who can't afford proper legal representation and whose situations require someone who can read documents and see what they mean." She looked at him. "He'd pay you," Caleb said. "Real wages, professional rate." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about a narrow window in the right kind of world, the window that opened to a woman who knew things and was finally standing somewhere that wanted her to use them. "Tell him yes," she said. Caleb nodded. He didn't look surprised. He'd known her answer before she'd given it. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. Outside the property, ran east to Miller Creek, exactly as it always had deeded and documented and defended, and she had known from the beginning, in the way you know things you've earned with your whole self, that some ground is worth every inch of the fight to hold it. The same was true of people. The same was true of the life you built slowly and with clear eyes out of the materials the world actually gave you, rather than the ones you'd been promised. Martha Gaines had knocked on a stranger's door with nothing but need and nerve, and what she'd found on the other side had turned out to be the thing she'd stopped believing in, ground solid enough to stand on, and someone beside her who knew exactly what that was worth. She had not gotten what she'd asked for. She had gotten what she deserved. And that at last made all the difference.